There are certain types of investment that your clients can make, notably into things like US mutual funds or real estate investment trusts. And the characteristic about those kinds of investments is the people managing the investments can reclassify the income that they distributed after the end of the tax year. So for example, a mutual fund that distributed dividend in 2023 might in 2024 say, you know something, we look back at that, what we sent out as a dividend, we're going to reclassify that as a return of capital. So now the problem is that everybody in the chain has already filed their reports to the IRS at the FIRE portal, but they all treated that income as a dividend, not as return of capital. Dividends are taxable, return of capital is not under the US withholding tax system. So now you've got a problem. The mutual fund will tell their paying agent that the reclassification has happened, and that paying agent will now say, well, now I've got to amend my 1042S. And so they will create an amended 1042S, which may, if they're using pooled reporting, just reduce the size of a pool and increase the size of another pool for return of capital in terms of the total amount that's being reported. That then goes to the IRS, and the paying agent now has to issue an amended 1042S recipient copy. And those recipient copies go all the way down the chain, with each financial institution in each layer receiving an amended 1042S and then needing to change their own reporting. But there are a number of different characteristics that can happen here which make a difference. If you're a non-qualified intermediary, for example, and you have disclosed all of your clients upstream to a QI, that QI will be able to see where the income came from. And so some clients might get an amended 1042S recipient copy, but others may not if they weren't invested in that particular mutual fund. And that's the challenge that QIs and NQIs have got in the payment chain. And it's why one of the most common errors that we see is that QIs in particular think that reporting is something that happens in March and April. In actual fact, 1042S reporting is a 9-month project. It starts at the beginning of the year with extensions, then you get the initial filing. But after the initial filing, you need to wait because all of the financial institutions upstream from you in the payment chain may receive amended returns. That means you'll get an amended return, and you've got to figure out which of your clients was affected by that change from the upstream issuer. Once you've done that, you can then file amended returns to the IRS. When should you do that? Well, the regulations basically say you should do that as soon as possible. Now, those amendments typically take place between early April and middle to end of June. So by the time you get to July, you're probably not seeing very many amended returns coming down to you. And lots of financial institutions will wait to see how many amended returns they get. Because don't forget, you may have clients who are invested in different mutual funds, different REITs, and each one of those will have its own amended reporting that's unique to it. So you don't want to have to do this job again and again and again on the same set of data. So many financial institutions will wait until typically July before they decide, now let's look at all of the amended returns that we got and consolidate those so we do our amended reporting on a consolidated basis. Now, that has challenges of its own, but one of the things that you need to be aware of is the IRS a few years ago implemented a new system in which every single 1042S is given a unique form identifier, a UFI. So when you file an amended 1042S, you will need to tell the IRS which form you are amending. Now, if you're a QI and you're reporting on a pooled basis, you may be reducing the amount in a general pool at 30%, for example, and that means that your original 1042S at pool level will have a UFI. You'll need to basically, in your amended reporting, give the number, give that UFI of that original form, and in your 1042S amendment, you'll need to tick the box that says this is an amendment to that original 1042S. So that the IRS isn't getting a whole pile of data that it can't reconcile, you are actually doing the reconciliation for them. Now, a lot of people, when they're going through this process, we'll typically say, what's the latest date that I can file amended reporting? The answer to that question is, it depends on whether you asked for an extension of time to file. Pretty much everybody asks for an extension of time to file, and they do that in January or February. What that does is it gives them 30 days time for 1042S, which sometimes is replicated 2 or 3 times, and 6 months on the 1042. So the latest date that you can file an amended return of a 1042S is when you file your 1042 US tax return. And that's on an extended basis on September the 14th. Now you understand why information reporting is actually a 9-month process and not a 2-month process. One of the other reasons that you might have to file an amended 1042S is, of course, if someone makes a mistake. In our experience, most financial institutions aren't particularly efficient at producing recipient copies. And so there are a couple of things that happen. The first is they often make mistakes. Banking data is notoriously bad. And so it's quite possible that you may receive a recipient copy which was based on inaccurate data. Now that eventually gets picked up by the financial institution, and that's another case in which they may say, oh, we made a mistake, we need to change the numbers. And so they make an amended report, not because an issuer changed the characterization of the income, because they just got the numbers wrong. Now, the important thing to know about amended reporting in general terms is the word amendment. In order for it to be an amendment, there has to be an original 1042S with a UFI on it to relate to. Some of the things that happen during the period between late April and September, particularly if they are corrections due to errors, is that they may create a new 1042S. So for example, if I use the mutual fund as an example, you may have a mutual fund that is reclassifying income from dividend to return of capital. Dividends are taxable, return of capital is not. So what you had on your 1042S pooled as a QI in dividends would have been one amount. But because you are reclassifying the income in that pool now drops. Now it may have been taxed at 15, it may have been taxed at 30. It doesn't matter what it was taxed at, but the amount, the gross income will have dropped that's taxable. And you'll need to now say, okay, now I've got to report return of capital. But you may not have had a 1042S with return of capital as the income type. Now, when you're doing amended 1042S reporting, you'll be amending the 1042S pool that you did create, but now you'll have to submit a new 1042S to represent the return of capital, which wasn't taxable. You still have to report the income as well as the tax. Now, in that case, the tax goes to 0, but the income still needs to be reported. Now, in that circumstance, you're creating a new 1042S, not an amendment. And that means that when you file that, you will get a late filing penalty on a per form basis. And that's one of the reasons that there's a tension in the 1042S reporting scenario, because you don't want to get penalized for late filing if you can either remove that possibility or reduce it. One of the ways of reducing it is, as soon as you spot the fact that you're going to create a new 1042S, is file it as quickly as possible. And the reason for that is, the quicker you file it, the less likelihood is that your financial penalty will be high, because the IRS penalties for late filing of reporting go up and down depending on when you file the new 1042S. What our recommendation is to all of our clients with their upstream counterparties is to do a quarterly reconciliation. Now, many institutions won't do that in terms of creating a real 1042S. What they'll do is they'll send you a spreadsheet that says, here is the data from the last quarter that we think would go onto a 1042S if we were going to create one today. You're able to take that and say, okay, do I agree, first of all, that that's what you paid us in the last quarter? And if we were creating 1042Ss from this data, are we comfortable that we know how to do it? Everything in the data is consistent, the format is correct, so you've got all of your ducks in a row, so to speak. And if you do that, by the time you get to March of the following year, If there are any reconciliation problems, you've already fixed 3/4 of the year, and all you'll be reconciling is the last quarter of the previous year. So that's one of the things that we recommend quite highly to people, is make sure you reconcile what you're doing with your counterparty.